Hello and welcome to the ProCycle YouTube channel. I'm Tom, and today we're going to be covering rebuilding the front forks of the DR650 while adding some upgrades from Cogent Dynamics. If you experience excessive brake dive where your front end is bottoming out often, or it just feels too soft, then upgrading to stiffer fork springs is what you need. Also, adding DDCs helps make the stiffer ride more manageable through its custom valving. If you've noticed fluid leaking down your forks or around the boots, it's time to replace your seals. And if your forks don't compress or extend smoothly, like a notchy feeling perhaps, then it's time to fully rebuild your forks with new bushings as well. Now when we go to replace the seals, make sure that both the lips are facing in the upward position as they are right here. I just want to take a moment right here. If this is your first time rebuilding a pair of front forks, sometimes these kits accommodate other motorcycles, so they'll come with extra little goodies inside there. Don't worry, it's a common thing. Now loosen the fork caps with a 22mm wrench. Now don't forget to loosen the cable stays and the clamps holding the fork boots, the lower and the upper. Use a 10mm socket to loosen the hold down clamp and a 19mm wrench to remove the front axle and wheel. Next, let's use a 12mm wrench to remove the front brake caliper mounting bolts. Remove the caliper out of the way, suspend it with some safety wires, I do here, or bungee cord, something. Just don't let it just hang. Moving along here, you can start with either fork. I decided to start with the left fork, and going to go ahead and use a 10mm wrench to loosen the lower triple clamp bolts. The last step to removing the fork here is to loosen the upper triple clamp bolt. You will need a 14mm wrench or socket. Go ahead and loosen that now, and be careful, the fork will drop out. Now that we got both of the fork tubes removed, go ahead and remove that fork cap the rest of the way. Remember, we already loosened it. Be mindful, there may be some preload tension underneath the cap. Go ahead and move the cap off, spacer, washer, and then go ahead and slide the fork spring all the way out. Now that you got the spring all out, go ahead and flip the fork over and dump everything into a drain pan, get all that fluid out, cycle the fork a few times, get it all out. With the use of the ProCycle fork wrench tool and a 6mm Allen key, we can go ahead and disassemble the fork now. Slide the fork wrench tool all the way down into the fork tube until it kind of locks in place. And then down on the very bottom end of the fork, there is a little Allen head bolt. Go ahead and remove that, and then everything will start to disassemble from there. Now flip the fork tube over with your hand cupping the top of the fork tube. You should feel the damper rod come sliding out. Go ahead and remove that. Using a pick, you can remove the snap ring holding the dust and oil seals in place. Just work its way around the fork tube. Now once that snap ring's removed, you can use the stanchion tube in the lower part of the fork tube kind of like a slide hammer, pulling on itself, and it'll pop the seals along with the stanchion tube out of the lower portion. Now that we've taken the forks completely apart, cleaned them all up, we can reassemble them in the reverse order of when we took them apart. Don't forget to use fork oil to lube everything as you're putting it on, the seals, the bushings, you name it. It's not going to hurt anything, it's only going to help. prevent tearing the new seals when you're sliding them on, I like to use a little bit of saran wrap over the end of the fork tube, a little bit of oil to help it go over, just in case there's any little micro burrs or something that you don't see and you slip it over, it could gouge the fork seal, and then next thing you know, your fork seals are leaking right off the bat. Now go ahead and slide the damper rod back into the fork and let it slide all the way down throughout the bottom. There's a little white collar, plastic piece down at the bottom. If that pops out, or if you've taken it out, it's fine. We're going to go ahead and slip it back on. It'll only go seat all the way back in one way, so you're fine there. Now before you can reassemble the forks all together again, apply some fork oil to everything, just keep it all lubed up, and insert carefully the stanchion tube portion with the damper rod into the lower fork tube. Seat it all the way down, twist it a little bit, and then take your bolt and a new copper washer and slip it on, tighten it down the best you can, and then reinsert your fork wrench tool and use that 6mm Allen key, tighten it back up. Let's drive these seals home with our Motion Pro Fork Seal Driver Tool. You can use a piece of Schedule 80 PVC, but if you want to make sure your seals are seated properly and undamaged, this is the tool to use. Next, we'll install the new spring clips to hold the seals in place. Start by inserting one end of the clip and use your fingers to walk it around the fork, clipping it in as you go. Now there are a couple measurements or methods that you can use to set the fork oil level. You can pre-measure out 565 milliliters or 19 ounces of oil, then add that amount to both fork tubes. If you don't have the means to measure fluid capacities, you can compress the forks all of the way down and fill them with oil until the levels are 6.5 inches from the top of the tubes. Remember a couple of things when refreshing your forks. One, use the correct oil for your application. If you're not using DDCs, Suzuki recommends 10-weight fork oil. If you're using Cogent DDCs, Cogent recommends 5-weight oil. Number two, these numbers are not the end-all be-all numbers to abide by, or the earth will open up and swallow your bike whole. These numbers get you into the ballpark of where you need to be, and then it's up to you if you want to change the oil levels from there. A quick note to add, try to bleed the air out of your forks by placing your hand on the opening of the fork tube while pushing and pulling on the tube, and be sure to cycle it a few times with your hand removed, and then check your fork oil level one last time. Next, with the use of a Cogent DDC installation tool, place one DDC with the nut facing out onto the tool and slide it down into the fork tube. Before you can remove the tool, slip your fork spring over the tool all of the way down to hold the DDC in place. Now you can remove the tool. We like to use this tool because it can be very tricky to get a DDC to sit properly in the fork tube. If you were to just drop a DDC down the tube, it would more than likely tumble and not sit correctly. Following the fork spring, install the OE washer, the spacer of your choosing, cut to whatever preload you want to start with. When adjusting lengths of spacers for different preloads, try doing so in 2 to 3 millimeter increments. Now put your fork cap on, tighten it down with a 22mm wrench, socket, crescent wrench, you name it. Throw the fork boot back on and slip it back up into your triple clamp. Once you've positioned your forks to your liking, tighten the upper clamp bolt with a 14mm socket and the lower clamp bolts with a 10mm socket. Now you can position your fork boots to where they need to be and zip tie them in place. Next, install your cables and front wheel. Tighten the axle bolt down with a 19mm socket or wrench, and tighten the axle cap bolts with a 10mm socket. At this time, we're also installing a Warp9 Fork Brace to increase the rigidity of the front end of the bike. All you need to install this brace is a number 30 Torx bit and some Loctite as desired. Note, these braces slip over the tops of the lower fork tubes. It is a snug fit, so don't be afraid to apply a little pressure to get them to slip into place. Thanks for watching this installation video. If you're looking into repairing your forks, check us out at procycle.us. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel, click that notification bell, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and as always, remember, your adventure begins here.